Artificial intelligence has the potential to reshape the judicial system. AI-powered tools, from legal research assistants to sentencing algorithms and customer service chatbots, offer efficiency. However, they also introduce risks, particularly bias. Additionally, the confidentiality of court records and legal proceedings becomes a pressing concern, as AI systems require vast amounts of data for training. As a result, they potentially expose sensitive information to breaches or misuse. While AI chatbots improve accessibility by guiding litigants through procedural questions, the possibility of providing incorrect information and the prohibition against giving legal advice highlight the need for careful human oversight. As courts integrate AI into their operation, ensuring transparency, accountability, and fairness will raise complex ethical and legal questions. Here to discuss those pressing questions is our moderator, Credell Webb, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the 1st Judicial District in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On today's panel are Courtney Whiteside, Director of the Municipal Court in St. Louis, Missouri; Allison Bratton, Clerk of the District Court in Grand Forks County, North Dakota; Andrea Powers, Human Resources Director for the Idaho Court System in Boise, Idaho; Amy Emig, Business Development Manager for the Oregon Judicial Department in Salem, Oregon; Kelly Hutton, Court Administrator for the North Dakota Court System in Grand Forks, North Dakota; Peter Kiefer, host of the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series; Nicholas Brackley, Technology and Solutions Specialist for the Oregon Judicial Department in Salem, Oregon; Norman Meyer, Retired Clerk of the United States Bankruptcy Court in the District of New Mexico; and Roger Rand, Manager of the Multnomah County Circuit Court in Portland, Oregon. So let's join Credell and our discussion of AI and the courts.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are at. My name is Credell Webb. I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Philadelphia Courts, and I am a NACM board member, attorney, a NACM Court champion, and a certified diversity professional. I am not an AI professional, but I do use AI tools for a number of training programs, and I think that AI is the wave of the future. It's something that's going to be very helpful to any court professional working in any capacity. But I also think that we have to think about these tools in a responsible manner. And I'm looking forward to our discussion of ethics after this presentation. Before I get into my agenda, I would like to recommend that everyone check out the AI guide. I think it is very helpful in understanding AI, especially if you're a non-expert or someone who has not studied this field. The AI guide was crucial to helping me even develop this presentation for you all today, but also in how I use my AI tools at the court. I'm going to give a special shout out to Roger here because he wrote an article in the Court Manager, but it really helped me navigate the AI guide because, as you may know, it's a long document. There's a lot there, and it's not meant to just read from start to finish. You can really search the document and look at the sections most relevant to you. And I just wanted to highlight the contributors and the working group. And for those members who may not know how to access the AI guide, you're going to go to our NACM website, click on the resources tab, click the NACM store. You're going to select guides and you're going to look for the AI guide. As you can see, it'll be $0 for NACM members, long as you log into the portal. With that said, let's get started with the agenda. We're going to talk about what is artificial intelligence. We're going to discuss the way that it's used, and then we're going to get to the ethical considerations, which is what we are all here for today. So all of the information that I have in terms of definitions, it's all going to be coming directly from the AI guide. Sometimes you'll see at the bottom that I'll have the page that I got the information from. I understand that there's going to be revisions, so this data in terms of the pages may not always be accurate, but I did this to show that you really have to use the guide and look for what it is that you're looking for. You can't, it's not the best practice to just read it from top to bottom. There's information is going to be at different places of the guide. And so what is AI? According to the guide, it's a difficult term to define. However, One of the common definitions that's used internationally is an AI system is a machine-based system for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives how to generate output, such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments, right? Sounds like a whole mouthful, and we all have seen AI, we're hearing about it. And so in today's presentations, I really want to walk you through some good uses of artificial intelligence. So what is AI used for? So I decided to ask this question to Google, and I'm thinking about doing a basic Google search. And one of the things that I noticed during this search, it shows me that there's an AI overview. So we're seeing that AI is built into a number of things. It's not just I'm searching Google. AI is even integrated into my Google search. So when I asked what can AI do, the response was automation, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, and face recognition. AI can do so much more, but that's just some of the things that came up when I asked Google. And I also asked the question, what are some of the top AI tools? I'm not going to name all of them, but here's a list of tools here, and they may do a number of different things, serve a number of different functions, because some people have heard of like ChatGPT, which is one of the more popular tools, but there is a host of tools, as you can see here, depending on what you want to use AI for. So let's talk about some common uses and some uses that you may see at your courthouses. Document creation, image creation, create computer programs, analyze data, create drawings, voiceovers, music, and solve problems. When I'm thinking about the courthouse, I'm thinking about document creation and image creation and maybe analyzing data. But when you think about analyzing data, you have to be really responsible. And we're going to talk about the AI guide and what advice it gives to you for analyzing data. But there are a number of things that you can do with AI, especially when you're looking at non-confidential data, like even developing this presentation. As you can see, there's some forms of AI, like even this page that I've used myself just to make the presentation a little bit more visually appealing, because I, of course, don't know how to make some of these graphics happen the way that AI does. So it can be very useful into making your presentations look appealing, or if you're developing a training with, let's say, some hypotheticals, and you come up with a hypothetical, but you're like, I don't know. You can insert that into the system and see what AI gives you. So, the results that you get are going to be based on also what you put in. You put in good data, you get back good data. Sometimes if you put in something and it's, not the best, AI may not return the best results to you. Back to the guide. So, ethical considerations. Just because we're using AI doesn't mean our ethical considerations go out the door. So when I think ethics, you're thinking your codes of conduct, any court rules that are currently in place as it pertains to things such as confidentiality, or attorneys may have certain rules of ethics. You want to make sure that whenever you're using AI, you're using it responsibly and within the confines of your own particular courts or ethics. So what I have here is the word sanction. As we all know, there have been attorneys that have been sanctioned for using AI tools. More specifically, they use the AI tool to create legal documents, but then the legal document will cite to case law that does not exist. So we can't have so much trust in AI that we don't double check the work. You have to make sure that you have AI, but you look over it to ensure that it is accurate. AI can be a very beneficial tool, but it can land you in hot water if used incorrectly. More ethical considerations. Now, I wanted to provide some real life examples of me using AI. And so I asked AI to draw these robots. Specifically, I said, draw a robot that is holding a folder that says confidential. The AI was able to draw the robot. They couldn't draw confidential, so I just kind of added a confidential stamp. But I am going to talk about confidential information today. The next thing I said was, AI, I want you to draw an AI robot in a cap and gown with the word education written. And this is what it gave me. It was an error. And I thought to take it out and try to work with AI to get it better, because when you're dealing with AI and you're asking it to do things, you can keep talking to it. You can make it get better. Hey, AI, you spelled this wrong. I knew I could have really worked with the machine to get this better, but I decided to leave this error in here purposely because when we think about how smart AI is, how it learns, everything that it can do, I told it to write the word education. I spelled education correctly, and the output was still wrong. So this goes to show that AI isn't perfect. And if it can mess up on something as simple as the word education, imagine if you're using AI to develop a report that it can make mistakes. So don't overtrust it. You really have to make sure there is some human oversight. With that being said, though, AI can save you a lot of time and energy. There's no way I could have drawn these robots myself. I don't know how to draw, and it would probably have taken me, days to do something like this. But I specifically decided I'm going to leave this in here so you can see an actual mistake that it made. Also, another thing to point out, considerations misspelled. So it says ethical consideration. So I wanted AI to help me with this whole slide here. You see, it looks a little different. AI did okay, but there's some errors here, right? I think it did a good job on bias. So I said, draw a robot that is looking at something that says bias. And so you can get AI to create slideshows. It can create entire presentations. It can create one slide like it did here. It can create multiple slides. That can save you a lot of time. But again, if let's say this was a presentation that was on a completely different topic, I wasn't talking about how I used it, and then I just start looking at it and I'm realizing, oh, wow, all this stuff is spelt wrong and there's issues with this slide, I would not be happy with the output. But if I made sure that I double checked everything, go in and make the corrections, then you're going to be much happier for what it's producing. So with that being said, though, we are going to talk about confidential information. One common rule, and this is a rule that I got out of the AI guide, is that a court should not put confidential or sensitive information into AI products unless the court has verified that the contract terms for the AI product contain adequate data security and protection requirements. Right now, many courts may not have a contract with an AI program. What I think is happening is that people are just using the AI programs that are out there and that are available to the general public. And one takeaway that I have from this is that we can't treat AI in the same way that we treat our Microsoft Office. If I'm asked to write a report that has confidential information or sensitive information, the court has contracted with Microsoft and I'm writing it into Microsoft Word, I feel very comfortable doing so. But if you take that same information and if it's sensitive and if it's confidential and you're putting into one of those various AI tools, your court has not contracted with those organizations, you could be putting data at risk. We don't know where that data is going. We're still learning about AI, how it's developing, how it's taking that data, where it's putting it. So we have to be very careful about that, especially as court professionals. And when we're thinking about public trust and confidence, because if data gets out there that's confidential, that doesn't make us look good. So we have to be very intentional about what we're plugging into these systems, even if it's going to make our jobs more efficient. So maybe perhaps finding ways to, use different names or different fact patterns so that it can help you a little bit, but then you put it in Microsoft Word and then you go ahead and change it and make the necessary adjustments. It's just something to consider, especially right now that I don't think many courts are using or are contracted with specific AI vendors. If your court is and you're able to determine that you have verified that the AI product contains adequate data security, then I think great, go for it. But if not, let's just keep this in mind that the AI tool is not like you using Microsoft. Education. So another piece of advice that comes from the AI guide is before getting started with any education or training program, work must be done to ensure success. Courts must create an internal policy that supports and provides permission regarding the use and experimentation with AI in the organization with appropriate guardrails. So this means you don't want to all of a sudden just start creating educational programs when the people doing the education don't even understand AI. You have to have those guardrails. You have to experiment with it. AI learns. It learns from the user. When you plug in data and you tell AI, hey, I didn't like that result, work on this again, it'll keep getting better. And so in order for your court to have training or develop training, you really want to work with it. You don't want to just say, hey, here's a training based on the AI guide. Everybody go for it. Try to make sure that you're experimenting with it and making sure that you're using AI so that it adds value to your organization and is not some tool that's just confusing to court staff and members of the court who are interested in it. Bias. Bias is mentioned about 75 times in the guide. Anybody who has done any research on AI knows that bias is a problem. And so we have to think about bias mitigation. AI systems must be evaluated and audited regularly to ensure that processes do not result in any kind of discriminatory pattern. I think this becomes very important, especially as you start to rely on AI and you're seeing that it has good results and maybe you're double checking it, everything was good, and then you start to let it operate on its own without that double check, and you may not be catching certain bias here. I'm going to mention 3 types that were mentioned in the guide. There's the algorithm bias, a type of bias derived from the set of instructions that a computer is programmed to follow. So when you think about that, that's your input. You could be telling it, I want you to take this data and do X, Y, and Z. But if there's some bias in your instruction, that's going to interrupt the results that you get. There's also confirmation bias. And this is, even though confirmation bias works in other areas, we're talking about it in terms of AI. This occurs when an AI system favors certain information that supports pre-existing beliefs, expectations, and assumptions. And this can result in a feedback loop. So this is why we have to constantly ensure that the results that we're getting back from our AI systems make sense. So we have to have that human oversight. Then there is the data set bias. This is different than the algorithm bias. When you think about the algorithm bias, I'm telling the system, hey, this is what I want you to do. When it's data set bias, you can tell the system, this is what I want you to do, and everything was correct with your instruction. But when you're giving it certain data, if that data has bias within itself, the result is going to have bias. And so you can't expect AI to just go through the data, remove the bias, and then give you an unbiased result. We have to be very intentional about the limitations of AI and what it can do. When you look through the AI guide, you're going to notice that there are additional types of bias that you can look at. But this is going to be very helpful, especially as courts begin to use these tools to evaluate data and to save time. You don't want to sacrifice you don't want to increase efficiency and then sacrifice accuracy. So this is something that we have to be very careful about. Now, we have some serious discussion questions, and this is what we really want to get to. This is the fun part for the ethics meetings. This is what I always look forward to because we make it a group discussion. So the focus is not all about on me and my presentation. And also, I am using this from the standpoint of a person who conducts employee training. I also generate certain reports myself. I am a person that does like to use AI, but as we get into the questions of ethics, it's not always straightforward. And you'll notice that at all of our meetings, we're discussing things that sometimes it can go either way. And so I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it back over so that we can get into the discussion of ethics. Thank you, everyone. So question number 1. As a court manager, you receive a critical report from one of your most respected staff members. The report is exceptionally well written, with impeccable grammar, a flawless logical flow, and contains an insightful analysis that surpasses anything they've ever produced before. However, you have some concerns. The report's quality is significantly higher than that staff member's usual work. You suspect that they use some AI tool to assist them in drafting the report. Furthermore, the report contains confidential information. How would you approach this staff member? How would you approach this situation?
My first question with thinking about that is, did we specify that, or that they couldn't use that, or did they cite if they used it? I think that really plays the outcome differently for me.
Absolutely. I think depending on, hey, have you ever talked to this staff member about AI? Did you say we can use it? Did you let them know that you can't put confidential information? That's a strong consideration. Do we have any other thoughts on this hypothetical?
Yeah, I think Courtney's made a good point. That, I mean, does the court have a policy dealing with the use of AI? And I think the NACM guide strongly talks about that. And if a court doesn't have a policy on it, you need one. And I think that's one of the messages that comes out of this fact situation, is that if you had one and it gave specific guidelines and direction and requirements for the use of AI, then you can put this fact situation into context of that policy and then apply it in an appropriate way.
That's a good point, Norman. And I'm going to throw a curveball out there now. So let's say you do have the policy, and the policy talks about the fact that you cannot plug confidential information into the AI tools. But this employee didn't tell you whether or not they used AI. You just suspect it. What's one way that you will go about this scenario now?
That's a hard one because it could be a very insulting question.
I think there's another variation of that which is problematic, and that is if there is confidential information, however, an individual, maybe an employee of the court or maybe not, scrapes it off the internet. It might have been posted inappropriately or unethically on the internet, but once it is in the internet, is it in fact in the public realm, and therefore fair game for anybody to pick up?
I think that's certainly a consideration. And sometimes we see this come up when we think about comparing like confidential versus sensitive information as well, too. This sort of, is this confidential? Is it not? I see that we have Nicholas.
Thank you. Yes. I think from my perspective, it also really depends on where and what type of system the information was submitted to. There are secure cloud AI services. There are a couple under investigation at OJD where we can be very confident that the data is secure and we can then submit personal information. And then there's also the scenario where you have an AI system that's run locally inside of your firewall, where you can submit anything into that because no data is ever leaving your firewall. So I think the spirit of your question assumes that this is data that's submitted to a AI that it should not have been. To that, I think there are some tools that you can use to check for AI generation. There are like specific phrases which often tag generated content. But from a non-technical perspective, I think it is just a challenging conversation to have. It's good to go in with some evidence for your suspicion. Then, regardless of whether somebody approves or denies, to be ready to clearly state what the policy is, and maybe be ready to work with your IT department to make sure that the system that you suspect got used to generate can't be accessed on work computers.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I appreciate that it could be difficult bringing that to somebody's attention just because you suspect that they've used AI. And I like that you said, well, there's also tools out there that can help you, or maybe you can work with IT to bring this person to bring that to this person's attention. I think that was an excellent point of view. I am going to go to the next question. In a world increasingly reliant on AI-powered decision-making systems, how can we ensure fairness, transparency, and accountability when these systems impact areas like job applications and criminal justice statistics? How can we prevent algorithmic bias and ensure that fairness and access to justice is upheld? So that bias that we talked about with the algorithm, essentially, you're putting in something into the AI system, and because AI saw that there was some bias in your input, now it's returning something that has bias in it. How do we prevent that? What are some of the strategies that we can get around this bias to ensure fairness and access to justice?
I think that's the huge challenge. I mean, we all have biases in general, right? Whether we like to admit it or not, one way or the other. As long as it's up to a human to feed the machine learning, then there's always going to be a bias. But that's a great question. That's really challenging.
Yeah, and Courtney, it's challenging, and we still have this issue even without AI. There's always bias. Yeah. So I think what you're saying it makes so much sense that it's not something that just has an easy answer. It really doesn't. Norman.
Well, one area that I think that AI has great potential and being used quite a bit is, process improvement, and helping, in workflow management. And one of those, and an area that in particular that's sensitive to this whole bias thing is, or area is, recruitment and selection of employees. And so you have an AI-based system that reviews applications on the front end that come in at the raw level and makes recommendations as to who's qualified or not qualified for the position. And then it moves on to, the reviewing panel or whatever. Well, that step of using an AI-enabled HR application reviewing system, boy, you better be real careful about whether or not the system has inherent bias based upon what the underlying training data and instructions that it was given in terms of the rules and such. And so, I think this is the potential for bias there is really big, depending upon how and what system you use at that step. So I think that's a great example of where courts need to be very careful of doing that. And similarly, and HR is a big area of mine that I've always been, like our performance reviews of employees. If you introduce an AI system into gathering data on employees' performance and then making recommendations as to, how their performance is on some sort of rating scale, for example. That's another system that would be very prone or susceptible to having bias introduced. And this is regardless of what you talked about. Humans have bias. We all have inherent bias. And so the idea is to discipline that in ourselves personally, but then we also need to have the discipline to make sure that we're not introducing bias into our work processes, whether it's an HR system or in case flow or whatever.
Absolutely.
I'd like to throw in the possibility that this really is a cultural policy issue and it rises above the implementation of AI. Let me give you a specific example that I've got in mind. One is that, say a court wants to create an algorithm to assist in bail decisions, risk management for release and bail decisions. So they go back and take 20 years of that court's bail decisions that they have on the database, and they use that as training data for an AI algorithm to determine the risk management advisory rating for bail decisions. They discover that, in fact, there is bias in that decision-making algorithm. But the algorithm is based on 20 years worth of data, which means that the data had to come from 20 years worth of biased decisions that the court had already been made well before AI ever came on the scene. So then the question is, do you perpetuate that? I mean, the fact that the decisions that were made by judicial officers for 20 years without the assistance of artificial intelligence is by definition fine and unbiased? Or do you call out the fact that the court has had an issue for 20 years of biased decision-making, and that needs to be rectified, and probably needs to be rectified at a level well above the implementation of the AI algorithm?
I appreciate that hypothetical, Peter. I think we that's a strong consideration. Like you said, some of these data points were there well before we had AI systems. I see Allison's hand.
Yeah, I was just going to go off of something that Norman said. on the onset when you're looking at applications or contracting out for these algorithms, are these organizations going to be transparent in how they're formulating these algorithms, or are they going to be considered more of a black box where they're protecting their proprietary information? And so we don't really know what's being inputted into this algorithm at some points if they're not being transparent about it.
Absolutely. I'm going to move over to Nicholas.
So bias in LLMs is definitely one of the big things that we're worried about from an implementation perspective. A lot of SaaS providers offer tools to help detect it. In the Azure ecosystem where I'm the most familiar, there's a content filtering tool which is designed to detect certain types of harm, and one of those types of harm is bias. But ultimately, we can't rely on any of these tools to truly substitute for human judgment. Humans obviously carry their own biases, and that's why the tool itself is biased. But one of the main strategies for detecting bias is having a human in the loop. This is a design phrase you will probably hear if you go into any of the AI literature. It basically says AI presents options, AI presents recommendations, and then a human comes in and makes the decision. That's one method. Another method is exactly what Mr. Kiefer indicated, and that is have AI try to detect bias for you, sort of as like a second layer of AI after the decision is made to then send it back and say detect. But ultimately, humans are still responsible for what AI produces. Accountability is one of the most important AI principles, and that means at very least doing sampling from those decisions and having someone review them all the time.
Absolutely. That human insight is so important. Did anybody else want to share before I move to the next hypothetical?
Just as a common recommendation that we see in policies coming out of states is AI at this point should not be used to make decisions. And as Nicholas was saying, these are guides. It can be used as a guide, but ultimately, to Peter's point about release assistance or release advice, the AI may provide that, but the person who signs the release order is a judge, and that judge is ultimately responsible for that release. And if they're going to use any type of intelligence, whether it's from a human release assistance officer or whether it's from some type of algorithm, they really should be determining whether or not there's bias in that response or whether or not that response is accurate, because their name ultimately is going to be responsible for releasing that person.
All right, so for the last hypothetical, a number of AI tools are being released to help litigants file pleadings. Sometimes we hear of these like AI chatbots. If this technology becomes commonplace, what are the ethical concerns that we must consider? For example, does this displace human lawyers? Or would this reduce the number of clerks needed in filing offices? We can also look at the alternatives. Do we see AI tools as being helpful to bridge the gap between self-represented litigants and those that can afford to hire an attorney? Perhaps these tools can ease the burden of court clerks working in filing offices. So there's various chains of thought. Someone talked to us just about some of the ethical considerations there with these tools that are designed to help the self-represented litigants entering our courthouses. Does anyone see it being a inherently bad thing, or are you on the side of it being a tool, something that's going to be good and useful moving forward? What are some of your thoughts?
I'll jump in and say, in answer to the first set of questions that you had, which is yes, yes, and yes. Yes, it is going to replace lawyers. I mean, we don't want to say it, but I think it's going to, because self-represented litigants are adverse to seeking out and paying for lawyers, and this is going to be an aid for them to do that. Whether they use it adequately or not, they're going to go out and they're going to find ways to prepare their documents and pleadings without the use of attorneys. Probably is going to reduce the number of clerks that are needed on the line level. What it's going to increase, I predict, is it's going to increase the need for technical analysts at a higher level to do this analysis. So it's going to be an employment shift from line staff up to analytical technical staff.
But we go back to guardrails, though. I mean, at that point, like, ultimately there has to be somebody who is answerable for incorrect or false information, right? Like, ideally you would say, oh, it's the filer, right? It's the filer's responsibility.
Yeah.
But and one thing that Roger has said in a conference past, we were talking about the relevance of evidentiary procedures when it comes to AI and what that looks like, and whose responsibility is it to determine if something is a deep fake or whatever. And Roger's comment was, well, it's the jury's. And I thought, holy cow, that was mind-boggling to me. Accurate, right? But still mind-boggling, because as much as we are not trained as court professionals, we are not trained in these types of things. The jury of our peers likely is not either, or quite the opposite. Maybe they are. Maybe there is a Roger sitting on the jury that could sniff out a deep fake from miles away. So it is really difficult. And I think automation to some degree has already not eliminated, but diminished the need for clerks in certain areas. I think that's already in use today, but it's a very interesting question. Amy, you've been quiet. I'm gonna call you out. What do you got?
My thought is that in this perspective, AI, there are lots of areas where self-represented litigants have not had access to the courts because it is a high bar for entry, and AI can reduce those barriers in a lot of scenarios. In Oregon, for example, there's no forms for a complaint for a civil case. If it's small claims, it is, but if it's over a certain amount, it's a lot higher. And there's no way for them to really understand or know how to formulate that unless they hire an attorney, and that's expensive. And so with AI, they could ask for a generated complaint. And my thought is that doesn't actually impact attorneys because they weren't going to hire one anyway. They didn't have the money for it. What it actually does is allow them to bring their claim to court when they may not have in the first place. And it doesn't change our need for clerks because they still need to accept that filing and get the filing fee and set up the hearings and do everything else that they need to do with that. In fact, it may even increase that participation because we have more active cases coming into the court because we've removed that barrier to entry for a huge amount of people.
I knew you were going to have something profound to say. So yeah, I think that's really exciting when we talk about using it to somewhat level the playing field in our courts in a lot of different ways. Norman, is your hand up for comment or is it still from before?
I want to say something.
I love that.
All right. Yeah, I totally agree that the AI enabled systems that are aimed at increasing access to the courts and providing information more effectively and transparently to the public in general, and particularly self-represented litigants, is a huge potential and application that is happening already. I mean, we have these chatbots that courts have done. I live in New Mexico, and the New Mexico court system has deployed a chatbot to help people answer questions, the common questions and that sort of thing. And it's a really pretty nifty system. The thing that I think needs to be the care, and this is the ethics committee, is to make sure that it's done in an ethical way and an appropriate way to uphold the canons, and so that the system does not have inherent bias. There isn't a bias in there, so that it steers people a certain way depending upon who they are and what kind of answers they give that is inappropriate, or that it reveals confidential information, or it gives legal advice. There's always that big problem when you're dealing with public self-help centers and your clerks at the front counter are answering questions that you don't want to give legal advice. You can give guidance about procedure and such, but you can't do it in a way which crosses the line into legal advice. And I think that's a big problem in this area, to make sure that that's not happening.
Anybody have any final thoughts?
I want to add, Courtney, to this. in addition to the juries, part of court procedure is that if someone produces evidence or submits evidence to the court, it's the responsibility to provide that evidence to the other side. And it's part of the procedure is if you feel that that evidence is fake or not true, then the other side needs to object. So this is an ongoing problem even before AI. If someone were to write up a false document and file it with the court, I mean, this is something that would need to be objected to. I see AI in not a different way. It may look a little better and it may be harder to catch. But if someone who's very close to the case, I would think would suspect if somebody's trying to do wrong and using AI in a nefarious manner. So I'm hoping that just these general rules of court will come to play and help resolve some of these issues as we get further into the world of AI.
Credell, anything to close out?
I absolutely enjoyed the discussion. I think everybody brought something great to the table. You can see that these are hard issues to think through. AI is just on the cutting edge. And so we're going to see, the more and more of the tools get introduced. And the reason I say this is because AI is popping up everywhere, even on this very Zoom. If you look down, you see something that says AI companion. That wasn't always there. And I think what it does, I haven't used it yet, but I heard that it can summarize the entire Zoom meeting. And AI is just seems to be in every facet of technology, whether we're ordering it or whether we want it there or not. And so I think this conversation was very important. And I just value all of the insight because I actually learned a lot from each and every one of you today. So thank you. And I truly enjoyed the discussion as well as this ethics meeting. Courtney, and I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Credell. It was excellent. Not that we expected anything less.
Thanks to Credell, Courtney, Norman, Andrea, Allison, Amy, Nick, and Roger for their insights on artificial intelligence in the courts. I know we will be returning to this topic frequently in the months and years to come. Join us at our Question of Ethics conversation, which we hold periodically after our NACM Ethics Subcommittee Zoom meetings on the fourth Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope to see you then, and have a great day. Thanks for joining us today. The Question of Ethics conversation is a regular segment on ethics, courts, and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, in the Court Manager Journal, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. Become part of the conversation. Join us live when we hold the Question of Ethics conversation. Episodes are held immediately following the monthly NACM Ethics Subcommittee meeting on the fourth Thursday of the month. Check the NACM Committee webpage for the schedule and Zoom link. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future conversations, email us. Our address is ethics@nacmnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The Additional Resources section on the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the hosts and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.